there are three types of mysticism: nature mysticism, human mysticism, or humanist mysticism, and divine mysticism. The last being a synthesis of the other two, which is Christian mysticism. Everyone, don't forget to join the Greenwood Fellowship on my website. It's incredibly rewarding and beneficial to have a walled garden of other serious people on this path of initiation, to share experience and wisdom together as we all progress. You'll have access to membership videos, the second half of all lectures and streams, monthly think tanks with senior members, senior group streams on our YouTube, and soon in-person events, conferences and meetups. Please join the fellowship. Nature mysticism can be characterized as, say, you've got the subject and the object, which we'll have a diagram of later. The subject, it blurs the lines between the subject and the object. It dissolves the lines between those two things. It doesn't get to the ground of both those two things, the essence of both those two things. It just divides the dividing line between them. So that's described by the sociologist Lévi-Breux, who was also someone that Carl Jung quoted often, and his concept of participation mystique, which means participation meaning you're not one, you're part of an organism. And so really, nature mysticism is Dionysian. It can be characterized by intoxication. And that participation is temporal. So those who take DMT, those who do ayahuasca. I know there's that chap who I like a lot, who does that Church of the Eternal Logos. He did that, and he actually came to Christ that way. He's extremely lucky. And obviously he now says, don't do that. Now he's an Orthodox Christian, but he's extremely lucky that he interacted with something from the eternal, because that is, anything from temporality could get involved with you doing that. And mistruths can be transmitted to you doing that. So you'd be extremely lucky to have something from the eternal outside temporality that would communicate with you with nature mysticism. And so that's connected with the Dionysian. It's the intoxication of Dionysian orgies and Kundalini. It's the broad way. This is the broad way, whereas the Christian mysticism is the narrow way. And the humanist mysticism is the abandonment way, which we'll get into. And so Broadway as in nature mysticism doesn't cleanse you. Nature mysticism just heightens what you are. You could say it blurs the lines between both of them. It's not cleansing the subject. It's not healing and resurrecting the subject. It's not even the sobriety of humanist mysticism and humanists like the Buddhists and the yogis go through, which can be characterized by sobriety. Nature mysticism is, again, being the broad way. If someone did hatha yoga and kundalini, they're lifting up, which is sacrilege and incredibly dangerous. It's without morally purifying yourself, without dissolving. You're just lifting up and mixing the things that you are. So both illusions from both sides can affect you in that. So it's not recommended, nature mysticism, and is dangerous. But that doesn't mean it's not involved with what we're talking about. Like I said, it's to do with the object and blending that line, blurring that line. But it's not the essence. It's not getting to the essence. And so the second one is humanist mysticism. Like we said, it's characterized by sobriety. And this could be considered, this mysticism is the mysticism of the yogis, which is, and also you could characterize it as that of the Buddhists now as well. It's a humanist thing. You could consider it as, it is the separation of the empirical subject from the transcendent self, but it's depersonalization. It's the, like I said, it's the abandonment of. That's why it's considered an illusion. But the problem with this is it doesn't access the divine, which we'll go into. But yeah, the way of depersonalization is kind of it's a checking out. It's a checking out from, hang on, you can't see that. It is a legitimate ecstasy, meaning an out-of-bodiness, but it's the dissolution of consciousness, not of being. And so that's why it becomes considered as a illusion. And a dissolution of that to dwell in nirvana, which is peace. But that's only the basic level of the divine. Even the breath that's just above it is still not, as the Vedanta says, which is still profound, but it's profound in a humanist way, in that they're right on the edge. It talks about the edge of the experience of the breath of these forces coming in and not knowing where they come from, which is true of the spirit. But what happens and can be characterized by this, like I said, is sobriety. But what happens is it's the depersonalization, but also God is removed from the equation. After this process, God's not necessary. What happens is the transcendent self is God, is what the yogis think. That's in terms of, because it's human mysticism on its own, it deals with the subject and going to the ground of the subject. And we'll get to the third one in just a sec. I just have to go to the bathroom. Bad timing. Okay. And so the third type is divine mysticism, which is a synthesis of both those two things. And we'll go into the details of that divine mysticism. But it can be characterized by love. It's not depersonalization. So you don't lose the subject. You don't lose the likeness and the image of God. It's not annihilated, but we'll go into the detail of that. But you can see here from this image of the chariot, we can talk about the dangers of mysticism and what mastery protects you from. Really, which are the three temptations that you're protected from in mastery, or it really deals with the fourth temptation, which is this megalomania, which can be characterized as a big problem, I think, of the East. What happened with the East is they technicalized a lot of their spiritual practices. They become the master. Whereas in this, as we'll go into, in this divine mysticism, the master is always above you and always collaborates with you. It's not something that becomes you and then you create a bunch of practices like Wim Hof and teach breathing practices to people who then just have it as a technology in their brain. Those are thieves and robbers, as the Lord said, as the Master said. But in terms of the meaning of this, you can see this man rides on a chariot. Where's my cursor? I don't know if you'd be able to see that. Maybe you can. It's all right. He rides on a chariot. He's standing He's not in ecstasy. Parts of his being are, but he's not checked out. He's not abandoning consciousness. He's consciousness, yet he's in union at the same time. He's holding a scepter, which is divine will, with a purified human will, collaboratively. He wears a crown. That's divine will. He has a breastplate. That's sobriety. So he's both at the same time, the subject and the object, nature mysticism and human mysticism at the same time, but to the ground of both of them, which you can guess is the Logos. And so he's protected by the breastplate from intoxication. He has sobriety, but not sobriety on its own. He has the life of God by going to the ground and the essence of the creation. Therefore, he has God with him as the divine person. And that protects him. Those three things protect him from, because he does the synthesis, that protects him from megalomania, exaltation, which is the problem of J mysticism, which I'm not really going to go into today. But that is one other problem, which is that on its own, without the synthesis of the personal and acknowledging the incarnation. And like I said, megalomania and rage. So they're the three things that, and this, you can get a lot more out of this. Also the canopy. So with that synthesis, you're protected from the problems of the other two. But now let's go into the yogic in detail. And we just sort of talked about a bit of that in terms of the problem. This is the problem with human mysticism on its own, which is the ultimate, which is sobriety, but also the broad way, which could be connected with a bit of nature mysticism as well. So as is talked about in Christianity, the broad way is, the narrow way is that of collaboration with the Lord. You could consider that as the purification and removal of what is evil, to leave the good of the person. So the non-likeness that you are becomes the likeness of God and the image of God. And so you still have those things intact. Now, if you think about this from the humanist perspective, and this is the thieves and robbers quote, those that came before me are thieves and robbers, which has two meanings. I'll go into the esoteric one later. But for the humanist mysticism, you could consider it the removal of consciousness, the removal of the good and bad. So the depersonalization, the image, the likeness, and the not, well, it's not just a removal of the non-likeness, it's the elimination of the likeness too. So they consider it to be the dissolution of being, but no, it's the dissolution of the person, because the person is divine. And you can see in the happening of this is why they ended up with the mistake of considering the transcendent self is God. That is a kind of megalomania to consider that. And you can see why then from that megalomania that the spiritual practices become technologies. We in the West technicalized our propositions and our rational thinking, but even worse, in the East, they technicalized their practices. So they're kind of like Ubermensches in a way, but not in the sense that they lift up the will to power, the broad way. That some of them are broad way, but in terms of the yogis, you have to give them credit for at least they have sobriety. They do. It's a genuine ecstasy, but it's the elimination of. And being a thief and a robber is the destruction of the personality, and the personality is divine, as we know from theology. Like God is a divine person, and so what happens to the yogis is that what's removed from that for them is an experience of things that are above the transcendent self. So there's no revelation. They may have wisdom. The wisdom of the world might be granted to them, which is like what the philosophers are able to access through their depersonalization. They did depersonalization too. But that comes from the object. That comes from going down to the ground of reflectivity, which is Sophia, philosophia. That does happen, but it is, again, it's depersonalization. You can see that in the technicalization of Plato, even Plato talking about love as the good. It's still in there, but they were close at least. I think the Hermeticism was closer than the rest of it because it because of the understanding of the good. But yeah, the yogis. So you have to give them that at least. I'm not saying, it's not evil, it's just humanist. But it can lead to problems because and one of the problems is that it was Luciferic in the sense that seeking nirvana, there was no value in their culture for revelation, for saving the world, which comes later with Christ. It was inherited later from Christianity. I think there are some parts of it now that have that as a value in Buddhism. But that's post-Christianity, and it comes from Christianity. But not even just coming, I mean, the truth of reality is Christian. But yeah, so anything that happens after Christ's incarnation, you'll see that even if it came from some sort of revelation, it's coming from Christ, the cosmic Christ, the cosmic Logos. And so that depersonalization. And so you could call it the way of abandonment. But this isn't what this diagram is saying. Hatha yoga isn't what we're talking about. That's just one part. The Kundalini is one. That's the broad way. We're talking about abandonment here when we're talking about human mysticism. But it is important to have it there and talk about it. But yeah, so they don't experience the 9 hierarchies, which are above that. All the saints. These are all mystical facts of being. Mary. These gods, the practice should, or if you do it in Christian mysticism, give you access to these beings. As Rudolf Steiner talks about, as all that the saints talk about, as Valentin Tomberg talks about, that is not available to them. And to understand better what depersonalization is, losing the ability to cry, it's the removal of the good and bad. And so that's a known thing. Yogis don't have the gift of tears. And with that, we could talk about, no, we'll talk about that next. And so with that understanding, the tears. So a big thank you to all our members, contributors, producers, who you see here in this plaque of honor. Without your financial help, this fellowship wouldn't be possible at all.